Hello, and welcome to the Developer Podcast, where we talk about how to make cities worth living in, which often has to do with the spaces between the buildings as much as the buildings themselves. My name is Christine Murray, Editor-in-Chief of the Developer and Director of the Festival of Place. Designing inclusive cities often means considering our blind spots. But what about our deaf spots? How can we consider the impact of the built environment on deaf people in the city? Amanprit is an experienced deaf city strategist with a focus on inclusive design, disability inclusion, and social impact. Born deaf and having discovered her strong deaf identity in her teens, Amanprit is the founder of Deaf City Hub, vice chair of Sign Health, and former co-chair of Greater London Authority Disability Network. Amanprit joins me today to talk about how we can take a more enlightened approach to designing places. So welcome to the Developer Podcast. Please tell me about you, who you are, and what you do.
Okay. Thank you, Christine, for having me here today and the opportunity to tell you more about me, my practice, my thinking. So my name is Amanprit Arnold. I am profoundly deaf, born deaf, a BSL user, have grown up in the deaf community, but came into the built environment sector when in my first job at RICS and being in the built environment sector for the past 15 years.
So I know you've talked about your experience from the start of your career, beginning at RICS. You went on to work at ULI, and now you've moved on to start your own consultancy. Tell me a little bit about your professional journey and where you're kind of arriving now.
Okay, great. And I'll try and summarize it quite quickly. So I started my career at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RIS, for about 5 years, delivering global urban research project and global academic conferences for surveyors, and did a lot of travel. I moved to Urban Land Institution, ULI, for about 5 years, delivering research in Europe, as well as looking to grow the European advisory services in Europe. What that means is there were opportunities where I was able to go to different cities around the world and bring the best urban experts in different fields together for 1 week to tackle an urban development or land use challenge. So that was really fascinating because every city different, everybody had a different professional background, everybody had a different perspective on what makes a city or a place work. At the same time, doing a lot of research and thought leadership on urban issues in the sector and what we're coming from America and working with our European partners. But in Europe, I think at that time, I'm not sure about now, most of our members were European real estate investors and developers. So for them, it was about what was interesting for them, what trends, what sector to invest. Then I moved to the public sector, working for GLA, Greater London Authority, for the Mayor of London. And I absolutely loved that transition to go from international to local, even though it's a global city. And it just gave me kind of like a fresh perspective that at the end of the day, it is about people, it is about London delivering places for Londoners and just bringing that kind of people perspective to what they do compared to You're Alive, which is a completely different sector. So that's kind of like my professional background. Yeah.
So your most recent role at GLA, what were you working on there?
So I came to the GLA via public practice, and public practice is a kind of a brokerage agency that is designed to attract private sector built environment professionals into the public sector. I was inspired by a previous, my former boss, Elizabeth Rappaport, who did it herself, and she told me about it. I was like, okay, but I was very self-conscious about the fact that it was focused on the architectural sector. So I was questioning myself, what can I bring? Most of the cohort are architects. I'm not an architect, but with her encouragement and support applied through the public practice and would match with a unit at the GLA for the infrastructure team. And the infrastructure team, because infrastructure can mean lots of different things, it was specifically focused on utilities, so energy, gas, water. And around that time, I think it was 2021, everybody kept talking about decarbonisation, net zero. So to hear about this utility sector is completely unknown to me, and how you make a city net zero, because all of this stuff is happening underground. We talk about placemaking that's happening above, but nobody really talked about, well, they're good, but they're in the engineering sector, utility sector. Um, how, what keeps a city functioning, or the light, the gas, electric, water, all of that adds up to a city becoming net zero or carbon friendly. So I moved into there in the policy team, worked there for about 2 years, and worked with the Mayor's London Infrastructure Group. And that was fascinating, working with the CEO to try and do partnership working and share data, and to have a gig one approach. And that means, rather than gigging up to fix roads, let's try and be strategic about this. Let's see what's happening and gig up road. Then I moved to the regeneration team, which was in my property exchange hat on, bringing my former property real estate sector experience to that, to try and raise awareness around diverse high streets in London and why we need them, why it's important, lots of like best practice examples. We also, from the public sector perspective, wanted to learn from the real estate on what are you doing, what stories do you have. But I also appreciate that the public sector are doing great things. So there was lots of examples that we had. So I think people were more interested in that than what we were doing. Moving on to women and girls, gender inclusive design experience. So I was enrolled, but overall, there were opportunities for me to participate in inclusive design. And that's why I'm doing what I do now, which is a disability urban strategy. So yeah.
So, what were you seeing that led you to set up your consultancy around disability urban strategy? Were you seeing kind of a lack of expertise or understanding? Is it that, or is it really like in the existing built environment, a lack of inclusivity? Or is it also within the professional sector, kind of lack of skills and understanding?
I think it might have been around COVID when everybody obviously thought about health and disability, and just seeing health and disability in a completely different light. Everybody was vulnerable at that point. So there was a lot more talk about EDI, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of that. And it just made me look at the city and look at, by the way, I grew up in the deaf community. I went to a deaf boarding school. My friends and network are deaf. I'm a vice chair of a charity called Sign Health that aim to address health inequalities for deaf people, which means accessing the health system, accessing NHS through just we can't call. So how do you access it? Innovation comes from that. So we set up our own, well, Sign Health partnered with a virtual BSL, virtual relay service, where deaf people can call this BSL 999, and you call them, that the interpreter will call the hospital for you. So it's the inequality that deaf people experience. So I guess from that, I was kind of like looking, and then the Rose Ellis, Strictly Come Dancing, the media profile. And I'm thinking, this is my community. I know these people, but we just don't get the opportunity to really share our expertise and lived experience in their own sectors, obviously. So I just thought about myself, hang on a minute, what can I do for the built environment?
You were looking at how you could bring your built environment experience together with your lived experience
Yeah.
with the deaf community. And it's incredible. I mean, congratulations on the work that you do. It feels like we have these huge blind spots if we didn't realize that calling 999 was a barrier. It feels like there's tremendous oversight there. What are some of the considerations for the deaf community in the built environment? Where are you seeing disconnects? And what is your lens on that for people?
I mean, there's lots of things. I think I come from a perspective that inclusive design, yes, you need to design and co-engage with people to make a place inclusive, but there's more you can do. It's about using technology to make a place inclusive. It's about inclusive communication, so people are aware how to arrive at destination through information. It doesn't necessarily have to be, design is a very important part of it, stakeholder engagement is an important part of it, but you can be creative. I mean, like for example, I think a lot of people may not realize this, is that FaceTime on Apple phone, it was initially designed to get people to communicate, but everybody's using it. So those benefits. Before, when I started my career, I had to do conference calls, I had to do captions. There was no video calls, there was no captions. But having that accessible technology makes the workplace more inclusive for me. So I'm just thinking about it from that perspective. When I was at the GLA, I was also the co-chair of the Disability Network. And we had fantastic senior leadership prioritising this within the organisation. And I think in London, it's like 1.2 million people that are disabled, and which is about 15% of the population. I think it's higher, but I'm going somewhere with this. Internally in the organisation, the staff reporting was officially on the HR system, 9% of people disclosed that they were disabled. Within a space of a year, with a lot of awareness raising, me stepping up into co-chair with my other two co-chairs who had autism, who was a parent with a child who had ADHD autism. Within that year, we did a staff survey result survey, and a staff survey, 75% of the organisation filled in that survey, and 19% of people disclosed that they were disabled. That's within 1 year, and that's not everybody. And some people may not even realise that they experience a barrier, or they're just not aware of it. For example, in neurodiversity, there's a lot of awareness around that lately, which is why I was the co-chair at the Disability Network. We set up this neurodiversity subgroup because they wanted a safe space for them as well. So my personal definition, and I think it's also the right definition online, disability is something that is a barrier that a person experiences in their everyday living. It affects their everyday living, whether it can be temporary, it could be permanent. No, it could be you've broken a leg and that's temporary. It could be mental health, which is temporary or permanent, depending on the situation at that time. But everybody experiences disability. If it's not themselves, they'll know somebody taking them to a place. A wheelchair user, it's about accessing places, but what about mums with buggies and prams? So I think throughout the last 3 years, I've had opportunity to contribute my thoughts and thinking in lots of steering groups, and one with the architectural sector, most recently with the Crown Estate in Grosvenor, who have just launched a inclusive spaces and places commitment last November. And they did a lot of work around this, and they did a launch, and I was on the panel. But some of the learning from there is fascinating. So, I mean, I share this with people. Spending power, we talk about high street footfall revenue expenditure, but the spending power for the Black pound for UK ethnic minorities, 5 billion. For the LGBTQ plus community, the spending power is 6 billion, which is called the pink pound. The spending power for disabled people is 300 billion, and that's the purple pound. Hello, does that not tell you something?
And yet we don't discuss it at all. I mean, I think I've heard about the pink pound. I've never heard about the purple pound.
Yeah, it's massive markets, and we're only aware of the built environment sector. But there's this cultural, there's this media, there's this art, theatre, accessibility for events. So if disabled people can have accessibility to go to a place, then they will go and they will spend their money. But it's just not really thought about that way. The
I
other,
remember, I mean, you talk about this moment, it can be a temporary thing. And of course, my principal experiences around, having children and having, especially when I had multiple and I had one in a sling and a buggy. And I remember walking down the high street and someone saying, "Oh, have you, gone to this new breakfast place? It's really great." And I said, "Well, it has two steps and a sharp right turn. So no, I'm not going to go there because it's just too hard to get in."
yeah,
And that was a temporary situation, but it was an example for me, like very obviously, like they don't want my money, they don't want me in there, because there's just a physical barrier that I can't cross.
yeah, yeah. And you're absolutely right. That's like one point. So for disabled people, they'll be like, for me as a deaf person, I'll be like, I can go to lots of places. I'm quite highly adaptable, so I code switch. But I would rather go to a place with my deaf friend and what I'm hearing as well. If it's bright, not too bright that it feels a bit clinical, no, but just a bright enough place where I can see people and lip read people. I can hear well because I've got a cochlear implant. I've got implanted at 21, but it's just easier for me to follow conversations. I just feel more relaxed, and we're able to have an enjoyable experience out if it's in a place that is accessible for me and inclusive. I know I say accessibility is very important. I'm big on accessibility, but I'm trying to convey that into it's about creating that inclusive environment for everyone. It's inclusive design, but it's also inclusive environment through other methods.
I think it's interesting you talk about how technology can make a place inclusive. Lately, there's been a lot of or more discussion about how AI can be non-inclusive. It can kind of create images or text, for the average person, which usually means it's not kind of taking in the even great numbers of people who are not, considered average by an AI standard.
And and yet you're presenting technology as a great enabler as well. Of course, it's a big thing. It's not just one thing to everybody. But I wondered, what is your perspective? You've got, amazing strategic mind. You kind of are able to zoom out and see these trends and movements within the built environment. Are we at a crossroads right now in terms of, our use of technology, and how do we use it, as you said, to enable, greater accessibility and inclusivity?
It's a great question. I mean, AI is scary. It is really scary what's happening in the world. I get that. But for me, I have found it quite helpful. Because as a deaf person, even though English is my first language, I still prefer to do BSL. So sometimes, obviously, earlier on in my career, I'll be reading, managing like long Gen report. So I felt it took me longer to digest it. Maybe it did, and maybe I was quick, but I was quite self-conscious as a deaf person coming into the workplace. Like, am I on par with my hearing peers? But just kind of it's dense, whereas AI can kind of like summarize it very quickly, clearly, concisely, and it's more efficient. But in the built environment, from a disability perspective, I don't know. I'm learning. I mean, there might be new things. I know for a fact there's one example to be able to book interpreters. There's not that many of them, and the demand for them is really, really, really high. So to try and be smart about it, like I said to you earlier on, I can get an interpreter through a BSL virtual relay service online quickly, but there's still not enough of them. So there's this new thing come out of the University of Surrey to try and do sign language and AI. It's completely wow. So you can basically put a web text on into this like uh, box online, and it will come up with a person signing exactly what that text says. But that's BSL, British Sign Language. It's not American Sign Language. It's not French Sign Language. It's not Irish Sign Language. So people think sign language is one. It's not. There's several different types of sign languages in the world. That's why it's very nice that we have international sign language, which is universal, and I'm able to communicate. Some deaf people are able to, not fluently, but I can communicate with a person where their English is not their first language through universal sign language, because there are some similar signs and body language. So yeah, it's quite fascinating. That's why I think when it comes to inclusive design, accessible design, and I know I've heard and I've shared the thinking behind Get Space, which is a design concept. And I'm like, this is great, but there's more we can do. There should be universal design, and there is universal design, and we're evolving and creating. The other thing I wanted to share was my very good friend, Christopher Lang, who is a deaf architect. He set up Deaf Architecture Front to campaign and raise awareness around making architectural education accessible. What that means is that he created sign language, architectural sign language, rather than getting the interpreter to spell out architectural, because that slows everything down. So he came up with partners to create those sign language and taught interpreters, taught people at university, and he's done some great stuff. Through his research at Royal Institution of British Architects, RIBA, qualified architects, only 1% disabled. And within that 1% disabled, 0.2% are deaf. So why are we not encouraging, welcoming more disabled architects who could design our environment more inclusively, rather. And he's also campaigning to be able to do his architectural examinations in DSR because English is not his first language. Yeah, so it's amazing. He's an amazing, inspirational guy.
It's in the general built environment industry, similar to architects. What are the barriers? I mean, you've mentioned this very clear language barrier of having to spell out, architrave or whatever the words are that you need as an architect. Is there also just a continuing discrimination that is preventing, deaf access to built environment professions?
I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of
Of all
everybody
deaf
because
people.
everybody's
And I don't want to
experiences.
ask you for
No,
it.
no, 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 no. Everybody's experiences are differently, but because I'm in the deaf community, I am aware and speaking to people who were architects, who were surveyors, who were engineers, every key profession you can think of in the built environment about 40 years ago or so. But they all left the industry because they didn't feel it was accessible. Maybe they experienced discrimination because they can't speak well, or there wasn't accessible support packages with interpreters. There wasn't technology. They couldn't call. There was no email. So the world is very different now than 40 years ago. But they all left the profession and went on to do other amazing things. And because it's not just within the built environment sector, but there are deaf people out there in different sectors who enter a field, and if it's not welcoming or accessible, or depending on the individual person and their own experiences, some of them do leave the sector. I mean, there's also this other thing where people just want to move careers as well. But yeah, so I feel now at a point where I absolutely love I've always loved being in the built environment, city making. I've loved it, but I did want to kind of like hang out with my guest community, sector, charities, commercial, all of that. So I feel like now is like the perfect time for me to be able to do both.
That kind of brings us naturally to talk about the Deaf City Hub, which is a project that you're working on, a longer term project. You're in the early stages. Can you tell me a little bit about what is a Deaf City Hub, where this idea came from, and what you're working on creating?
Okay, great. It's a bit of a backstory, but to sum up, I came up with the Deaf City Hub idea about May 2023. Because I was working on property exchange. I'm in the community. I saw a gap, high street, a global city. Where do we belong in the city? Do we have a space? For example, you have LGBTQ plus. They've got Soho, they've got Vauxhall, they've got Brixton, they've got their bars. They have a community space to go to. It's the same with faith communities. They've got their churches. With the deaf community, we had deaf club, like community centres that are not fit for purpose, and they're being sold off by charities because they need money for to keep charities going. So I was kind of like, where do we belong in this city? Not just people's houses, but where do we belong? So I came up with this idea, and it's very early stages. But essentially what it is, a world-leading mixed-use cultural innovative hub for the deaf community, because we need a space like this. There's so many different sectors. Deaf art needs an accessible theatre, media needs an accessible media studio room. They don't want to have to explain everything. They just want to be able to go to a place and for it to be completely seamless and frictionless. So like a theatre or a conference room is flat. But imagine if it was like, I guess, like Angle, international people around the world, get people will go there. The community's that small globally. It's very easy to connect. Definitely compared to like built environment sectors or in the professional world. So anyway, this idea came up and I held a co-design stakeholder workshop with a few of the CEOs of the gift charity sectors in education, employment, health, to bring them together and say, this is my idea. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They were like, absolutely, it's in their strategy. They need a place like this. It all links up, but also it's a home for everybody to come together. And also kind of like a get rework type of space. Now, it's not just going to be closed off to us. It's also open for other people to learn. For example, the government have introduced a GCSE BSL. The demand of interpreters really small. So if we can get more, if we can create kind of like a learning hub, I don't know, the sky's the limit. But this is my big idea, vision. And I guess I'm now at a point where I'm just trying to think this through gently and be a bit more strategic about it. It's a 5-year passion project. And yeah, I'm feeling quite excited and positive about it.
Does this exist anywhere in the world? Have you found anything else like that? Because it does sound like a really powerful demonstrator project for so many places if they could come and see this done well in terms of the
Yeah.
conference facility and the venue and the way that it would work.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously my deaf community are really excited. I'm like, hang on a minute, but at the same time we can do this to demonstrate best practice global model for people around the world to see, not just for deaf people, but disability, for property, for design, engineering. Imagine working with a tech company to make it inclusive, ringing a doorbell with a video, not, sorry, I can't get in. Are they going to let me in? You can't hear the door buzz. So yeah, there's lots of things. There are deaf clubs, as I mentioned. There's a deaf university in America called Gallagher University. That's the only deaf university in the world. And that's how the deaf space principles was born by this hearing architect who collaborated with deaf students. Hansel Bauman. So he came up with the concept in 2010 or 2006. I'm not sure, but a long time ago. So you've got the university. You do have the odd deaf school. I went to a deaf school. That's an inclusive environment for me. You have maybe a deaf cafe. You know, it's different types, but nothing like this. What I'm thinking, nothing like this now.
Which is, you know, as you said, a theater, a conference facility, a WeWork. I mean, it's a properly inclusive piece of city for grown-ups too, because what you describe are kind of students or people who are still developing, but this is like, you know, and also welcoming other people in, because I imagine at the deaf university and the deaf school, people are welcome to come in, but it's not the same kind of open door cross, you know, cultural communication and mixing.
I mean, I've been asked, why don't you make it a disability hub? And I'm like, absolutely, but there's a cultural aspect. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which might be interesting, is I went to a deaf boarding school, and honestly, that saved me. It really did, because I was with peers like me. The teachers were very just well trained and professionals in deaf education. So it wasn't necessarily about the education, even though that helped. It was more about my identity, my self-esteem, and having peers like me. I was exposed to that world when I was 11. But from a built environment perspective, I was just like, hang on a minute. If the Department of Education is willing to, they do pay for the special education environment, school needs tailored for all these children, and they put that money in them up until the age of 18. I mean, did you know that the government put 1.6 billion into special education needs per year, and they're still not enough. Apparently it's increasing, but it's not enough. So I kind of like, where do we go after 18? It is like a cliff off edge. So that's why I'm very passionate about creating. We need to do more in the built environment to create spaces that are accessible and inclusive to these people. Yeah.
You've said, where do we belong in the city? And this theme of belonging comes up a lot. It comes up with people who, do not identify as having a disability, or do, identify as being neurodiverse, or etc. But, all kinds of people are seeking to belong in the city. And how do we create these cities of belonging? And I find that a really movable thing as well, because at different stages of your life, as you're going through different things, you kind of seek a different kind of belonging, or maybe your community shifts and you need to find, what does it mean to belong in the built environment industry, or what does it mean to belong? So I find that a really evocative and important statement, because I've always felt that cities are somewhere where people should belong. It always feels like when you go to a big city, that is where you should be able to find a pocket of belonging. The small town is where you belong, or you have to leave and go to the city and find your pocket of belonging. So yeah, it feels right to have places of belonging. It feels like that is essential to being a city, is to have
Every
pockets of belonging.
community, every person, everybody, even international visitors can belong in London. So yeah, absolutely.
Because these are centers of trading and mixing and crossover and engagement, and
Yeah.
and I feel like the Deaf City Hub could be a really beautiful, compelling, and exciting part of that. So what is next for you? Not just the Deaf City Hub, but as you set up your consultancy and as you're looking ahead, we're still early enough in 2025 that, we can engage with that. Also, we're in a kind of shifting and scary cultural environment when we are people who are committed to inclusive places and accessible places. It feels like there are, kind of attacks against that at the moment, attacks against those spaces. I mean, my personal solution is, my personal response to that is to just try to keep the conversation going for the people who understand that that we have more that unites us than divides us, as you say. But I guess for you personally, as you're looking ahead to 2025 and you're kind of working on these ideas, what do you see for the year ahead?
Right. And by the way, it is quite scary right now, but we've been here before. I'm talking about years ago, way before the Black Lives Mattered, way before that, when there was racism and, events happen, you go forward by 2 steps and then you go backward 3 steps, and it, to me, it's like history is repeating itself in a very different way. But as long as we, remain committed to what we believe in and just like, I don't know, trust the process, because there will be another event that will come along that will shift the way we think. So, I mean, nothing's permanent, I would say. As for me, my consultancy is to be a disability urban strategist. In a nutshell, that means I bring disability inclusion to city making and urban development. Now, that can be interpreted in a number of ways, but my main aim is to try and get people to think differently about inclusive design. It's important, but you can expand beyond that. Use accessible technology, use partnership working, use innovative ideas, use creative communications that don't cost that much to make an environment inclusive. And at the same time, I am also trying to demonstrate there's a £300 billion purple pound. The Department of Education spending 1.6 billion into special education needs school a year. So there is I know for sure, we're not, doing stuff for disability people. It's not charity. It's a commercial return for you. You just don't see it. I mean, companies are doing inclusive things. Media are doing inclusive things. There is a commercial return. Now, I don't want to commercialize it, but I am trying to get people to think like that. So that's my main purpose for this year.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's really said it or thought like that. So yeah.
I think there's a sense that I think we got stuck at ramps somewhere. We got stuck at these kind of, as you said, the built manifestations. I'll put kind of textured pavements, and maybe it's just a few more handrails or something. It got kind of stuck in that built environment, and I think what you're talking about too moves beyond that as well to a kind of wider pool and wider definition of accessibility.
Yeah. And also inclusive design, accessible design doesn't have to be ugly. It really doesn't. It's just there's not enough of a bigger market to increase the demand and supply for beautiful ramps, amazing bathrooms, nice glyphs, braille on the wall, right braille, by the way, not the wrong braille. I've learnt this recently. There's 3 different types of braille. So you need to design and engage with the disabled community because they have innovation, they have solutions, but people are innovating, but nobody's realizing that you can innovate more with them. Yeah. And give solutions. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for your contribution and for bringing all of this enlightenment and understanding to us, and also helping me to make this podcast more inclusive as well. So, so thank you so much for that and for everything that you do.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Okay, see you.